Hi, I'm Mohsen, and I'm so excited to welcome you to The Seeking Soul. This podcast is a space where we explore topics like philosophy, spirituality, and literature, often from perspectives you may not have encountered before. As someone who grew up traveling, I've had the privilege of witnessing the deep similarities between cultures and people, even when mainstream narratives focus on what divides us. As an Iranian American, I've always felt to share the beauty, wisdom, and lessons from my Eastern heritage with my Western community, and vice versa. My hope is to be a bridge between these two worlds, fostering the sense of oneness and unity. With the help of AI, this dream feels more achievable than ever. Using documents and notes, I've provided with the link of the sources in the description. Along the way, you might encounter ideas that feel new, challenging, or even uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's the purpose of this space, to listen with empathy and approach every perspective with love and curiosity. Welcome to the Seeking Soul. Hi, and welcome to episode 8 of the Seeking Soul podcast. I'm currently reading The Anxious Generation book by Jonathan Haidt. In this book, it discusses the rewiring childhood that is happening caused by epidemic and also social media and smartphones. It's a very powerful book. It talks about very interesting and different topics of how social media and smartphones has affected a generation that did not grow up with a physical world. It also talks about how parents in the Western world wanted to protect their child from outside harm, but yet they have neglected the harms that could happen on the screen. This reminded me of a book that I'm familiar with, even though I have to also read that as well, called by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, called Emile, which some of you are familiar with. This book is actually extremely old. It's been published in 1763 in English, and it's been one of the most influential books in the Western and modern world. And it has been also used as a reference and source after the French Revolution. This book was banned before that. Some philosophers like Voltaire also criticized this book and only said there was only 50 good pages of this book. But the suggestions that I get from The Anxious Generation, written by Jonathan Haidt, is very interesting because I see a lot of similarities between what Jean-Jacques Rousseau was suggesting and what Jonathan is also suggesting based off of the research data that he's received. Because of that, in this podcast, I like to focus more on Emile's book. It's a 5-book piece where the fictional character Emile goes through childhood, adolescence, and upon marriage. And he basically describes how children should be raised in each different parts of their life. Of course, this book is, as I mentioned, it's from the 1700s, and the values have quite changed at some point. But I think the core essence, especially at the younger age, and how important and vital experimenting a physical world and letting them fail as parents is very critical into raising resilient and confident children as they grow older. So I like to welcome you to listen to a brief summary of what this book covers, and I hope you're interested enough to go and read the book and enjoy it. Let me know what you think in the comments and spread the word, and like and subscribe. Enjoy this podcast.
Okay, let's dive in. What if I told you that way back in 1762, there was this book? I mean, it didn't just suggest a new way to teach kids. It basically blew up everything people thought they knew about childhood learning, even religion.
Yeah, we're talking about Emile. It really was a shockwave through intellectual circles back then.
Totally. And for this deep dive, we've really gone deep into Emile, looking at the text itself, what it argued, and how people reacted to it over time.
Exactly. And the goal here isn't just, a history lesson. We're digging for those core ideas. Some maybe still feel revolutionary about how we learn, how we develop ideas that, well, we hope might spark some real aha moments for you listening.
Right, because the author, he was this really interesting guy, a reformer,
Yeah.
He felt like education had just lost its way somehow, lost touch with something fundamental.
Definitely driven by sentiment, by feeling. Very different from, say, someone like Locke. Much more cool and rational.
Yeah, exactly. And Emile wasn't just tinkering around the edges, was it? It went straight for the big ones: family, religion, social inequality, even how government worked. The whole structure.
It really did. And it's probably good to know going in that his ideas can seem, well, surprising, sometimes even contradictory.
He definitely wasn't afraid to challenge things.
Not at all. So, be prepared to maybe have some of your own assumptions pushed a bit.
Okay, so our mission today, as you join us for this deep dive, is basically to pull out those insights from Emile that still feel alive. The stuff about childhood, learning, education. What can still give you, the learner, a fresh perspective today? So, where does he even begin this whole thing?
Well, it starts right at the foundation with a really powerful statement about human nature itself. He famously wrote, everything is good as it comes from the hands of the author of nature, but everything degenerates in the hands of man.
Wow. Okay, that's a strong start.
It's the bedrock, really. That one sentence underpins his entire educational philosophy.
So this idea of the natural child, he talks about 3 sources of education, right? Can you remind us?
Yes. So there's nature, which is our internal development, how we grow naturally. Then there's men, how we learn to use that development, the social aspect. And finally, there's things, our own direct experiences with the world.
Got it. Nature, men, things. And he was pretty critical of society's influence, wasn't he?
Oh, definitely. He argued that even our best social institutions, things meant to help us, can actually make us, well, unnatural, as he put it. They push us towards defining ourselves relatively by our job, our role, instead of our absolute existence as a human being.
So, like, I'm a lawyer instead of just I am.
Precisely. He even said something really provocative, like the best social institutions are the ones that are best at making man unnatural by taking away that absolute self for a relative one.
Huh. That makes you think. So the big goal of education for him wasn't just turning out good little citizens for whatever society you're in.
No, not primarily. The main aim was to cultivate manhood, which he saw as this sort of universal human foundation. If you're truly educated in that sense, you're equipped for anything life throws at you, any specific role.
And how do you get there?
A huge part of it is practice over precepts. Doing things, experiencing things, not just being told about them. He said, our real education consists less in precepts than in practice. Think about how much we structure kids' lives today, maybe missing some of that natural hands-on learning.
Yeah, that definitely connects to wanting kids to be independent early on, right?
Right.
Building that self-reliance.
Absolutely. The child needs to understand deep down that he will always be in his own. It's about building that inner strength to handle life's ups and downs.
Okay, so let's get into the stages he talks about. First up, infancy and early childhood, like birth to maybe 5 years old. What's the focus there?
The absolute number one priority is physical development, building bodily strength and resilience. He talks about hardening the body, but carefully, gradually getting used to different water temperatures.
Right, not throwing them into an ice bath on day 1.
Exactly. And freedom of movement was huge for him. He really disliked the tight swaddling and restrictive clothing common then. Let the baby move.
More wiggling, less wrapping. Makes sense. He also had this idea that kids should learn limits from the world itself, not just from adults saying no, didn't he?
Yes, that's such a key point. Resistance from things, not from wills. If a tower of blocks falls because it's built badly, the child learns about gravity and balance. If an adult just arbitrarily says, don't do that, it can breed resentment, rebelliousness even.
So it's the difference between bumping your head and being scolded for climbing.
Precisely. It reframes discipline entirely. It's about understanding the world's rules, not just obeying adult rules.
And he warned about parents or caregivers jumping too quickly when a baby cries, right? That idea that needs can turn into demands.
Yeah, he saw a danger there. Those early tears, he called them prayers, genuine needs. But if adults rush to satisfy every single whimper instantly, they can become orders. The child learns weakness can lead to domination. They can manipulate adults.
Wow. So the caregiver's role is massive then.
Huge. He saw it as needing someone deeply invested, almost more than a parent, or at least more than just an employee, a mercenary, as he put it. Someone truly present and guiding, not just serving.
So avoiding that dynamic where the adult is either always giving in or always bossing around, because that teaches the kid about what domination and servitude from the get-go.
Exactly. He felt that was the risk. Those become the first ideas the child forms about relationships if that's their primary experience.
Okay, and this leads to that famous window example, learning consequences naturally.
Yes, the child breaks a window. Instead of immediate punishment, the tutor lets the child experience the cold wind blowing in. The lesson comes from the nature of things, not from the tutor being angry. It's amazing how that idea from the 1700s really anticipates modern thinking about, cause and effect, self-regulation.
It really does. It's much more powerful than just being yelled at. Now, he also had that kind of counterintuitive idea about losing time in these early years. What was that about?
It sounds weird, but it's about respecting the child's natural pace. Don't rush them. Don't force learning before they're actually ready. Let their development unfold organically. It's okay if they're not hitting milestones according to some external schedule. The time isn't lost if they're developing naturally.
Okay, that makes sense. Let nature take its course to some extent. What about learning language? Any specific advice there?
Yeah, he suggested starting with just a few simple, easy-to-say words, and crucially, words tied directly to objects the child can actually see and touch.
So not abstract concepts yet.
Right, and he disliked just bombarding kids with constant chatter they couldn't possibly understand. He also warned against pushing them to talk too early or correcting unclear speech too much. He thought it could make them timid or lead to bad pronunciation later. He actually observed that kids in the countryside often spoke more clearly.
Interesting observation.
Yeah.
And what did he think was the very first thing a child needs to learn?
How to endure, how to handle discomfort. He thought it was crucial not to shield children from every little bump or pain. Experiencing small difficulties prepares them for bigger ones later in life. To suffer is the first thing he ought to learn, he wrote.
That's pretty intense. Okay, moving on then. Childhood, say, ages 5 to 12, does the focus shift?
The core principle stays, dependence on things alone. Keep learning grounded in direct experience with the physical world and its consequences.
But kids start having more complex desires then. How should adults handle those?
Firm refusal for unreasonable demands, especially if there are tears involved just to get their way. But genuine needs should still be met promptly. It's a balance.
And he was still pretty down on traditional lessons and punishments at this stage.
Very much so. Still all about experience. He felt kids this age don't really get abstract ideas like fault or duty, so forcing apologies, for example, is kind of pointless. They don't grasp the morality behind it yet.
So instead, more freedom, more observation.
Exactly. Give them liberty, within safe bounds, obviously, to explore and figure things out. He called liberty time best employed, because that's when you, as the educator, can really observe their natural inclinations.
Yeah, and learning should be super practical, right? Like geography isn't just maps.
Right. Go outside, figure out where the sun rises and sets, understand your local environment first. Geometry isn't abstract proofs. It's using tools, measuring things, maybe even making your own simple tools.
That ties back to that utility and interest idea, doesn't it? The kid has to see the point.
Absolutely critical. The learning has to feel useful or interesting to the child right now, not just, you'll need this later. He loved the Socratic method, ask questions, guide them to figure things out themselves. Present interest, he called it the grand spring of action.
So even something like reading and writing, should that just happen naturally?
Ideally, yes. It should come from a genuine need or desire, like maybe they get an invitation they want to understand, or they want to write a note to someone. Let the motivation come from them.
It sounds like the tutor's job is less about direct teaching and more about setting the stage.
Perfectly put. He called it the art of governing without precept and of doing all while doing nothing. You create the environment, you guide subtly, but you let the child do the learning. And those little fits or demands, the caprices, he saw those as often being the result of bad training, either too much indulgence or too much commanding.
And physical activity is still key.
Essential. Constant movement, exploring the world through all the senses. He saw the limbs and senses as the actual tools of intelligence. Use them. He even suggested things like playing games at night to get over fear of the dark, or lots of jumping and climbing to develop balance.
Still learning from consequences too, I assume, like the window thing applies here.
Definitely. If the child carelessly breaks things in their room, maybe they experience the discomfort of that for a while. The consequence teaches the lesson.
What about practical skills?
Yes. Learning how a lever works by actually using one. And he stressed the importance of peer interaction, learning social rules, fairness, cooperation, maybe even competition, like in a college yard setting, sometimes more valuable than the classroom.
He also mentioned things like estimating distances or sizes, right? Using your eyes and hands first.
Yeah, developing that sense of spatial awareness. Touch things, look at them, guess the size, then measure to check. Using natural units sometimes, like your own handspan. And drawing wasn't just art class. It was training your eye to really see proportions and details.
Interesting. But he also saw value in things that weren't immediately useful, like maybe basic geometry or algebra.
Yes, but more for the mental training they provide, the logic, the reasoning skills, not necessarily for their direct application at this stage.
Even diet gets a mention. Simple, natural food.
Simple, moderate, let natural appetite guide you. And the overall goal for this stage. Less about stuffing their heads with facts, more about developing sound judgment.
So, knows less by heart, more by experience, things for themselves.
Exactly, and acts with purpose when they're free to do so. I also talked about managing risk, letting them experience small, calculated dangers to build courage, always matching the challenge to their ability. And learning social dynamics, like that example of a race where kids have to figure out fair rules to share the prize.
Okay, so now we hit adolescence. Ages, 12 to 15 roughly? What changes now?
This is where intellectual curiosity really takes off. They start wanting to know why. Causes and effects become fascinating. He suggested starting with big natural phenomena, the earth, the sun, pique their curiosity. But don't just give them all the answers. Encourage them to discover science, not just be taught it.
Is this where that desert island idea comes in?
Yes. It's a thought experiment. Imagine you're stranded. What do you absolutely need? What skills are most valuable? It helps them understand basic human needs and the interconnectedness of society, the value of different kinds of work.
And that leads into understanding things like trade and value.
Exactly. Introducing the concept of exchange, how different things have different values, and how money works as a common measure. But the focus is still practical. Its use is not deep moral philosophy about economics yet.
He also famously insisted on learning a manual trade. Why was that so important?
Well, partly for practical skills, sure. But maybe even more importantly, to break down the prejudice against manual labor. To see the dignity and intelligence in skilled work. He even thought the tutor should learn alongside the student. Cabinet making was his preferred example. Clean, useful, requires precision.
So it's about developing reason and judgment based on, real-world connections?
Yes, seeing the real relationships between things. That's what he considered a strong mind. Nature, he believed, is the best teacher because it doesn't lie. Our judgments about nature might be wrong, but nature itself is true. The ideal man of nature isn't swayed by frivolous opinions.
They learn because they have to figure things out themselves.
Right, using their own reason, exercising their minds. That's how mental vigor develops. It's not about knowing a little bit about everything, but knowing a few things really well, deeply understanding them, developing the facility to acquire knowledge, not just collecting facts.
Okay, last stage, early adulthood, 15 to 20. Big changes happen here, right? The second birth.
Yes, this is when the passions really awaken. So education has to shift again. Now focusing much more on moral and social development, on relationships.
How does that happen? How do you teach morality?
It starts with empathy. As their sensibilities and imagination develop, they become capable of understanding how others feel, what suffering is like. He actually advocated carefully, showing them the harsher realities of life, poverty, illness, death, not to be morbid, but to foster genuine compassion, not just pity or vanity.
So let's talk more. Experience of the human condition.
Exactly. And moral education is about action, doing good deeds, not just talking about virtue, learning the principles of justice and beauty through actually living them, through real interactions and relationships.
Friendship becomes really important now, too.
Crucial. They become capable of real attachment, understanding what it means to be a friend, and recognizing that in others.
And navigating the social world.
Yeah, learning to read people, understand social cues, observe manners, but also look deeper. Developing taste and discernment. He also warned strongly against the typical vices of society, the emptiness of chasing wealth without virtue, the importance of finding honorable work.
And admitting you don't know everything.
Yes, intellectual humility. The courage to say, I do not know, is a sign of wisdom, not weakness. Religion also comes in here, but introduced when they're ready for genuine understanding and love, not just memorizing doctrines. It should connect with their own inner moral sense.
What about love and romance?
That's a big part of this stage, too. Navigating attraction, forming healthy ideals about relationships. He thought imagination played a key role here, tempering raw physical urges. And travel becomes important now, but not just tourism, traveling to truly understand different cultures and human nature.
And finally, there's Sophie. His ideas on educating women. It's different, isn't it?
It is, very much so. Her education is explicitly designed around her role as a companion to Emile, the man. The focus is on developing qualities seen as naturally feminine, nurturing inclinations, domestic skills, modesty, charm, moral character geared towards pleasing and supporting her husband and managing the household. It definitely reflects the social views of his time.
Okay, so stepping back from all of this, this whole journey through Emile, if you had to boil it down, what are maybe 2 or 3 core takeaways that really jump out?
Okay. Well, first, definitely the power of learning through direct experience, letting the world and natural consequences be the primary teacher. That feels fundamental.
Yeah, I agree.
Second, just the deep respect for the child's natural development, not rushing things, allowing that internal timetable to unfold. Patience.
Right, that losing time idea again.
Exactly. And third, I'd say the absolute necessity of genuine interest and perceived utility. Learning sticks when it feels relevant and engaging to the learner now, not just for some future goal.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? How ideas from, over 250 years ago can still feel so relevant, maybe even more so today with all the information flying around. That focus on experience, on real curiosity, on why you're learning something. It definitely gave me a few aha moments.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a really interesting question, I think, for you, the learner, to chew on. In this age where we're just drowning in information, how do we actually cultivate that deep, natural curiosity that Emile talks about without just getting completely overwhelmed by it all?
That is a really good question to ponder. Something to think about long after this deep dive ends. Thank you so much for walking us through this fascinating work.
It was my pleasure. Really thought-provoking stuff.
It really is. We'd love to hear what you thought, any reflections or questions this sparked. Maybe it'll point us towards our next exploration. Until then, keep diving deep.